Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Brandon Cruz on again for an amazing, I think, seventh in our series. We did one that primarily focuses on what it takes to have the most successful fat loss phase, and it never, ever starts in a fat loss phase. As you know, my principles, which is why I absolutely love Brandon and why you're going to gain so much from this episode, is because you can't really build upon something that, number one, isn't really stable, number two, is sporadic, but number three, if it's built on a lack of self-trust, a lack of self-belief because of all the prior times that you struggled, that you failed. And above all, if you've never actually learned what it's like to feel good, what it's like to thrive, what it's like to be well-fueled, you're going to feel like things are okay because that is all you know. But once you actually allow yourself and trust yourself to go through the process of fueling really well, of nourishing yourself, of feeling fucking strong in the gym and capable of doing things, you'll actually start to want to keep doing the things and realize, hey, I was actually living such a low quality life before. And we promised on part 6 that we were going to talk a little bit more about women in the late 30s, 40s, and 50s that are in this process and targeted more than ever by these menopausal gurus, saying that you need to do things a certain way. Don't lift heavy. Heavy is relative, but so are you. What you need is different from the next person, but they're selling you this plan that requires you to be like this minute kind of, let's manipulate everything. It's like, no, things don't change just because you turn 40, just because you turn 50. It's just that things don't work the same because the things that you were trying before weren't actually built for to last. It's just that you were in a body and a lifestyle that could handle the beatings, that could be resilient through it, and that could show up for it. But if you actually had a system back then, that would still work for you now. Why do you feel like it's so important for women to understand these basic principles of fueling really well, of not fearing carbs, and of building muscle?
Yeah, I think this is of prime importance, especially for women. I find personally that there are so many women that are stuck in this perpetual dieting mindset, and they think that if they just keep slashing calories, eventually they'll be able to get the physique that they want. And that's essentially what you're alluding to, Ruby. They're trying to do the same things that they did maybe in their teens or in their 20s. And as they evolve through the life course, they're realizing that A, it's not working, or B, they're frustrated with themselves. They think that maybe there's something wrong with them. So that's where we go to metabolic damage or to weight loss resistance or whatever it may be. And really what I want to get across, and I know that you had contacted me about this, that you really want to focus on, in order to build a better physique, you need to spend less time in a deficit and more time at maintenance or above maintenance. And that's a really tough pill for many women to swallow. But really what I try to get across to women, and I predominantly work with women at this point, from a coaching perspective, is you're not going to diet your way to a more muscular or toned body. At some point, you're going to have to shift your focus from just focusing on weight loss to actually fueling for muscle growth. And that's what a lot of people are not able to conceptualize early on. So they think, I just need to go on another diet, or I just need to try another program, or another fad diet, or another HIIT class. And they don't realize that there are some fundamental principles that would get them to where they want to be if they are willing to put in the time. Now, another aspect of that is there's a lot of women that want to gain muscle. They want to build muscle. They want lean tissue. And they'll describe it as, I want to be toned, or I want to have a shapely and sculpted physique. But at the same time, their nutrition does not match those actual hierarchical goals. So their primary goal is to gain more muscle and have a better shape, but they're calorie deficiting their way to hell. And despite the fact that it is possible to gain some amount of muscle in a deficit, you're not going to maximize your muscle building potential if you're always under eating. And over the 15 years that I've spent coaching both in person and especially online, I found that women are far more likely to go significant portions of the year in a deficit, which is hindering their actual ability to gain muscle and make the physique improvements that they're looking for. So really what we want to get across to the audience today is that muscle growth is actually very energy intensive and calorie costly process. Really, when I have this discussion, because I do work with a lot of women, I have to try to do it like through analogies. So I always try to get it across to them. I have a lot of women that are in the process of either moving or they're doing things to their house. And I always try to conceptualize it or analogize it in the concept of, think about if you were to renovate a house. If you were always short on building materials, you can only do so much to that actual house, but you don't have the foundation in place. You don't have the building materials to actually add those other rooms to the house or those other components of your kitchen or whatever room that you want to expand upon. So if you're serious about changing your body, not just shrinking it, but actually transforming it, you need to be willing to eat at least at maintenance calories. And honestly, most people will do better spending time just above maintenance and in a slight surplus, because building muscle requires that you're creating something that's called positive protein balance. And that just means that your rate of muscle protein synthesis is exceeding and consistently outpacing your rate of muscle protein breakdown. But if you're in a deficit all the time, you're more likely to be in negative protein balance, which actually predisposes you to muscle loss, not growth. And that's what a lot of women don't understand. They have heard all of these things from diet culture. Now, I want to make a caveat here. I am not against fat loss phases and things of that sort. I am someone that I believe in nutritional periodization. Almost every single client that I work with, at some point, I will take them through a strategic fat loss phase. But I always say this, and Ruby, at one point, we had done a podcast maybe a year or two ago on building phases. And I always say that I like a 4-to-1 ratio, meaning we're spending 4 times the amount of time outside of a fat loss phase than we spend in one. So say I did an 8-week fat loss phase with a client and they got lean within that period of time. That means for 32 weeks, outside of that, I want them either at or above maintenance. And what a lot of people don't get is, yes, the fat loss phase or the diet itself is what will reveal the physique you have. But if you don't have a foundation of muscle and you don't have enough lean mass on your frame, you're just going to become a smaller, scrawnier version of yourself. And there's many reasons behind that. So if we actually look into the literature on what a calorie deficit does to different aspects of the muscle growth process, essentially, we see that when you go into a deficit, even if you have high amounts of protein, a large deficit, even over 10 days, this was a 20% deficit over 10 days, can decrease muscle protein synthesis by 19%. And then when they've looked at more drastic diets, which was a 33% deficit, I believe, it caused a 27% reduction in muscle protein synthesis. Now, there's also research that looks at a much broader scheme. So there are a lot of people that come to me and they're looking for body recomposition, which is a goal that we can attain. However, there's a limit as to how much we can push that goal and how much fat loss we can induce while gaining lean muscle. So there was a recent meta-analysis. I don't know if you saw it, Ruby. It's by Murphy and colleagues. And they looked at gains in lean mass from resistance training in a deficit and out of a deficit. And what they found was once you go past a 500 calorie deficit per day, gains in lean mass basically stop. And on average, the larger the deficit, the more lean mass is lost. Now, the reason why that's especially important is because a lot of women that I meet and that I interact with or that consult me for coaching are always trying to lose weight as fast as possible. So oftentimes they're in a larger than a 500 calorie deficit. However, when we actually go back to that meta-analysis, what they found was that even at smaller deficits than 500 calories per day, when they compared it to those eating at maintenance or in a slight surplus, those that were in a place of energy balance or above gain more muscle and strength than those in a deficit. And that's why I've always been a big advocate of nutritional periodization, where I will go over a client's goals and then we'll transition them into a goal-specific phase based on what physique outcomes we're prioritizing, whether that be fat loss or muscle gain. However, I do want to say this. If your goal is to maximize muscle gain, you want to avoid living in a calorie deficit, which is a mistake I find many women making. And I'm sure, Ruby, you can attest to that. There are so many individuals that it's almost like every single phase or every single season is a dieting phase. And it's fine to spend some amount of time dieting for fat loss, but you need periods at maintenance or even slightly or above if you really want to see your body change and build a muscle that will give you the shape you desire. Now, this is all great on paper. I could talk the science, I could talk the physiology and the biology about it, but I do get that there are some psychological hangups. There's a lot of, women that I interact with and that I work with that they have a fear around eating more, gaining weight, or getting bulky. But what I've seen time and time again, and this is both in my own practice, having coached hundreds of women, as well as in the research, what I've seen is that embracing periods of properly and sufficiently fueling your body leads to more muscle, a better metabolism, and ultimately the shape and definition you're after. And what you have to really accept and swallow is that muscle growth is already a slow process, and being underfueled just makes it slower and more frustrating. So what a lot of you women out there, if you are someone that you're really on this dieting hamster wheel and you don't want to get off because you fear, going back to maintenance or even to a surplus, it's like you're kind of selling yourself short in terms of the progress you can get. If you are someone that every time you diet down, you're not attaining the lean muscular physique you want because you don't have enough muscle mass and you feel like, every time I diet, I do lose weight, but I just look like a smaller, scrawnier, kind of flatter version of myself. What you have to realize is you have to go after what your bottleneck is. And what your bottleneck is insufficiently fueling yourself and not being able to progress your training in a manner that will be conducive towards muscle growth. And a big component of that is always being in a deficit. So the big thing that we want to get across to women out here on today's podcast is if you want a stronger, leaner, more athletic physique, you need to spend less time in a deficit and more time giving your body what it needs to actually build muscle, as that's honestly the best investment you can make into your future physique. And that's something I can't get across enough, because I work with so many women that have spent, I work with a lot of women, especially in the age groups of say 35 to 55. And there are a lot of women that come to me in their 50s. They're already either in peri-menopause or they're postmenopausal. They've already made that transition to menopause. It's the first time in their lives that they've actually focused on muscle growth. And after process, say of a 6 or 8 month building phase, they recount to me, or they express to me, how empowering it was and how much stronger they feel. And they wish they had done it previously. And I don't want to say that they're living in regret, but they're very aware of the mistakes that they made in the past. And for anyone out there that isn't, 55 at this point, or even later in life, you could do yourself a great service by just willing to lean into some discomfort and embrace the fact that building muscle is going to unlock the physique you really want.
There is something you said that I need to keep reiterating so that it kind of, it sticks. 1,600 calories is not your maintenance. It is not a maintenance for pretty much the majority of women. It is usually 1,800 calories and over that is your maintenance. And this is not the same as saying that you're not going to need to diet on 1,400 calories or 1,300 calories, because there are smaller women that are going to need to diet on less and less calories. But that is not your maintenance. And if you keep trying to do all of these training sessions and build your best physique in this 1,600 calories maintenance, you're trying to do both. You're trying to lean out, trying to build muscle, but you're ineffectively doing neither, because there is something that Brandon said, and I hope now it's become even more pertinent to you. You are focusing on the wrong things, and diet culture has ruined that for you, because all you know is, let's compare your progress photos every week. Let's get your weigh-ins and compare those. That is not going to measure progress in anything but fat loss. And they will move dramatically if you do fat loss phases right. Only no one's actually doing fat loss phases right, because you're spending your life in this perpetual mindset of fat loss. And you're never going to experience anything Brandon said with, I'm feeling amazing, if your mindset is still, I can't wait until I diet and see what muscle I built, because you're not fully invested into the process of building. And this is all about training. You're focusing on the wrong things. If you put all of that stress and energy and anxiety into what your training is doing, what the food then allows your training to then do to an amplified level, you're going to see beyond the results that you thought possible. And there is something that you said, being a female, being someone who struggled with this, I think that this will relate to you guys listening to this too, is I thought, well, my belly is still like this. It's not tight enough. I also don't have a waist because I don't have hips. But regardless, it's like, well, I need to lose this first. Those people look leaner. There is no way that I can afford those carbs. I haven't built enough muscle. I'm not an athlete. I can't eat those carbs. So you're bottlenecking yourself because you're not allowing yourself to just push into this process. And I've always said this to Brandon, and now I feel like this is something that we can speak on. Yes, building muscle is hard because you need to have that muscle protein synthesis, building muscle at a higher level. But here's the thing. Once you're over 30, you're losing muscle if you're not actively trying to keep it, if not build it. And that gets worse over time because your anabolic signaling decreases. So if you're constantly trying to get by on 1,600 calories, having sporadic intake, how are you expecting to build this physique? It is harder for women over 40. It is harder for women over 50. But you're not making it any easier if you're still trying to lose fat as fast as possible, because the fat loss process of it all doesn't actually get all that much harder as you age. It's just that life gets harder. So it gets harder for you to actually do the things. And then if peri-menopause hits, this is the worst time for you to try to actively focus on severe fat loss, because your recovery is going to be less. It's going to be harder for you to manage. And by the time you get to the other side of peri-menopause, you're fatigued from trying to force something in an environment that isn't conducive to it. So if you haven't spent at least 1 year eating enough, start there. I'd say 18 to 24 months, because then you're in this amazing place. And I'm not saying this is going to be the next question. I'm not saying go get fat. How do you explain to clients that eating more, fueling, isn't the same as getting fat? And why do you think so many women stay stuck in this constant deficit or think it's the only path to progress?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to get across the fact that I am a big advocate. First and foremost, I work with mostly physique-focused individuals. Ruby, you've had several of my clients on your podcast. You know several of them. These are women that range in age from, like I said, 35 to 55, but they're very physique-focused. That doesn't mean, I don't mean physique competitors. Yes, I have worked with at the upper echelon of the physique level. I've worked with many IFBB pros from bikini, figure, wellness, as well as physique. But I'm talking about the mass majority of my clients are what I would call high achievers and high performers. These are people that are excel in their work. They're type A individuals. They're go, go, go. And they're very hard on themselves, but they're tremendous. Like, they have tremendous work ethic, but oftentimes that work ethic is applied in the wrong manner. And so a lot of them are perpetual dieters. They're people that are very hard on themselves, and they're constantly dieting because they're scared of the opposite. And really what I try to get across to them, there's a difference between what my approach is, which is a lean building phase, and a bulk. And a lot of women have this misconception of what building muscle either requires or what it entails. A lot of them automatically associate it with precipitous fat gain, meaning that as soon as they get out of the deficit, they get to maintenance or they go right into a small surplus, they're going to be adding fat exponentially. And that's just not the case. When you do it in a strategic, titrated manner, and when you pair it, and this is something I do with all my programs, I'm pairing the nutrition and the training together in a periodized manner where they're matching one another. So how I get across to my clientele, what we're doing is I use this expression. I tell them we're fueling for the work required. The work required is what is going to lead to the progression in your training performances, which are going to lead downstream to the increases in muscle. So say, for instance, and a lot of times I will periodize my training programs and my nutrition programs very strategically. So for instance, I will make sure that I utilize what I call an undulating calorie cycle, meaning that there are higher calorie days on the training days where energetic demands are higher. And specifically, I'm going to make higher or larger increases in carbohydrates on those days because we're utilizing those carbohydrates during resistance training. And seeing as resistance training is anaerobic and glycolytic activity, I want to fuel for the work required. So we're utilizing, the fuel substrate that is necessary. And that's how I get women to buy into the carbohydrates on those higher carbohydrates on those training days. And then on the off days, when energetic demands or their calorie expenditure is lower, I will titrate that down. So there's a cycle in terms of the actual calorie amount. But really what I'm trying to get across to people is that this is not a bulking strategy where we're just eating, you're eating big to get big. That never comes across in terms of the nomenclature, the language that I use. I'm always talking to women about building muscle. We're trying to build not only your body, but your physique, your lean mass, and also your metabolism, and also your abundance. What I try to do is shift women from a mindset, I always say this, from a mindset of restriction and subtraction to a mindset of abundance and addition.
Because what you just mentioned with training is highly glycolytic. And we know that even if people say, well, you don't actually deplete that many carbs when you're training because this study says this, or people say this, yeah, that's because they're looking at your whole body. They're not looking at the actual muscle fibers that are getting work, including the power ones that are used for type 2 fibers. I can't think of a more simple explanation, but the ones that lift heavy. A lot of women say, I feel fine when I train on low, I feel fine training fasted. I feel fine training this way or without increasing my carbs. I can get through. I train really hard. I train heavy. I push to failure. What would you say to those women?
So first and foremost, I have done a lot of N of 1 trials, and I'll do cross comparisons with women where a lot of them do come to me and training in a fasted state. And I understand the popularity behind that. Some of them, it's due to training very early in the morning, or it's due to the fact that they think that they're going to be oxidizing more fat. And that is technically true. If you were to train in a fasted state, fatty acid oxidation is higher because insulin levels are lower. And so your body's going to preferentially use fat as fuel. But the issue with that is that, like I referenced before, resistance training is a glycolytic or anaerobic activity. It fuels off of carbohydrates. So we want muscle glycogen topped off. We also want blood glucose to be stabilized so that you have energy in terms of your actual performance in the gym. But a lot of times what people are overlooking is that just because you can do something and get away with it doesn't mean that it's optimal. So there's a lot of women that come to me and they've been doing fasted training for years. And they say, well, I've always done this. And I quote unquote performing well in the gym. And it's like, but you've never taken and actually done a trial where you've compared your fasted training performance versus a fed training performance. And that's what I have them do. I say a lot of times when women come to me and they're really stuck in this fasted training mentality or this undercarbing mentality, I say, listen, just for the first 2 weeks, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to introduce some more carbohydrates in the peri-workout window. So pre and post-workout. And I want to get a meal in, even if it's a small meal. This could be as simple as having protein powder and some coffee and some rice cakes. Like, this doesn't have to be this gluttonous meal where you're going to feel bogged down or have digestive issues when you're going to the gym. this could be a protein shake and some Greek yogurt and some fruit. It could be something small, but I still want to get sufficient. I want to top off sufficient amino acid availability to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and get you out of that breakdown state that you've been in through the fasted period overnight. And I want to get in some glucose availability, so carbohydrate availability. So you have both of the most essential nutrients for performance and for stimulating muscle protein synthesis and decreasing muscle protein breakdown. And I can't tell you, Ruby, how many times when I've done that comparison, and oftentimes I just get them to buy in by telling them, listen, we're going to do this for 2 weeks. If you still feel that you cannot do this, or your training performance, which we're going to monitor and we're going to track and we're going to log, if your performance is actually decreasing as a result of this pre-workout nutrition and these pre-workout carbs, I have no problem removing it. I've never had someone where their training performance has went backwards. The only thing that I've had on very few occasions is someone with digestive issues, just because they've eaten in too close a proximity to their workout. And that's where I just make modifications where I can even implement some liquid carbohydrates in terms of like a highly brain cyclic dextrin. And we utilize liquid nutrition prior to and during the workout. And there's always ways to work around that, especially from a digestive capacity. However, I've never had someone that now mind you, this is objectively done. So I'm tracking their training performance from a fasted state to a fed state. I've never had someone go backwards when I've actually added in fuel and actually fueled them sufficiently for training.
I love that part. And I feel like a lot of people rob Peter to pay Paul, and they want to save their calories, or they want to they are so used to this. I need to try to fit all my calories into like this 1,200, 1,500, 1,600 calorie bucket. But because they've never allowed themselves to push their calories up, which is where you were alluding to before I asked you that question, and actually eating a real maintenance intake and pushing for performance, which can eventually increase your maintenance intake, because you're going to then be moving a lot more, having like recovery, demanding recovery, and it impacts your whole life. Like, I feel like people focus too much on the calories they eat versus how do the calories you eat impact the calories that come out, and how do the calories that come out then impact the calories that come in. Everyone's always focused, what's the best macrocalculator, what's this, what's that? Well, it's not about the calories you eat. That's one part of the equation. It's about how that factors into everything else. So now I feel like that can transition into this. How do we get women to realize that 1,600 calories is not their maintenance, and that fueling more is better, that carbs are so critical for not just performance, but also recovery, also buffering cortisol, also helping them all fit into this piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. So first I'll tackle the benefits of getting to maintenance and above, and then you can pepper in some questions about the carbohydrates, because I know you want to cover that in detail, and I'll go through all the science with you guys. But really, when it comes down to it, I think it's really important to get across the fact that muscle growth is a slow process, and if you're in a calorie deficit, it's only going to make it slower and less effective. So if you're out there and your goal is to build muscle, whether it's bringing up your deltoids or your glutes or just changing the overall shape of your body, you've got to get out of that constant dieting mindset and start focusing on fueling your body. And so with my clients, my focus is to help them build lean muscle mass. And the first thing I'm doing when someone comes to me with that goal is to get them out of a deficit and eating at least at maintenance, but ideally above. Now, like I mentioned previously, this is not a bulk. This is not a free-for-all like eating fest. This is a lean building phase. This is what I always refer to it as. And it's a calculated intentional period where we slowly increase calories, not to see the scale jump up rapidly, but to maximize muscle gain while minimizing fat gain. But when it comes down to it, there are so many benefits that are overlooked by spending time and an adequate amount of time at or above maintenance. So the first thing that, Ruby, we've been touching on is that you're going to have more energy resources to go towards training recovery. And when you're properly fueling yourself, you just feel better overall. So your workouts are stronger, you can actually push yourself harder, and you're in the best position to gain muscle. And building muscle isn't easy. And anyone that sells it to you that it is, they're lying to you. They're selling you, it's essentially like a salesman, essentially. But what you have to realize is it takes consistent progressive overload in your training, and you need to eat enough energy, and you need to have the energetic resources to support that. And I work with a lot of women who are very physique focused, and they want to build specific muscle groups. I'm sure you get the same thing, Ruby. A lot of women that come to me, they're like, listen, I want to build my delts or my glutes. But the reality is your delts or your butt especially is not going to build itself in a deficit. And that's something that many people don't accept until they've went through cycle after cycle after cycle. And then they come to me and say, listen, I've been focusing on this physique goal. I've been trying to bring up my glutes, and I've yet to be able to do so. And then I run through their dieting history as well as their training history. And A, they're downregulated. B, they're underfueling themselves. And C, they're really not being able to progressively overload over longer time courses because they don't have the fuel that's required to do so. So if you truly want to develop specific areas, you need to step out of the mindset of restriction and subtraction and into a mindset of abundance and addition. And you need to be willing to fuel for the work required. The next benefit of going to maintenance or even above is it enhances your recovery capacity, which is really important because it's not just what we do in the gym. Yes, the stimulus that we create in the gym is the first thing. It's the impetus for all the cellular processes, the remodeling processes that take place that are going to eventually or potentially lead to muscle gain. However, proper recovery allows you to actually adapt to the training you're doing. And many women underfuel themselves. So despite crushing themselves in the gym, they're still not seeing the results they desire. And that's due to inadequate recovery. And one of the most effective ways to improve recovery is by eating enough. You need sufficient calories and nutrients so that your body can repair, grow, and get ready for its next session. Other things that a lot of people overlook, but I'm going to say this from a coaching experience, this is some of the most profound feedback that I get from women that I actually get at maintenance or above, is an improvement in their biofeedback and their quality of life. Because when you're eating at maintenance or in a slight surplus, your appetite is more well-regulated, your sleep tends to improve, and your overall energy is higher. So you feel better both in the gym and out of the gym. And that makes it so much easier to train hard, to keep going back day after day, to be consistent, and then also to stick to your diet plan. And what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of people are in this dieting mindset. And Ruby, we've talked about this many times where I refer to them as the weekday dieter. So they're restricted during the week, you're under eating during the week, and you're hanging on for dear life. You're white knuckling your way until the weekend. And once the weekend breaks, all hell breaks loose. You feel restricted mentally, you feel restricted physically, and then you go off the deep end essentially and you overeat. So you're getting all the negative adaptations from dieting Monday through Friday, but you're never getting the actual body composition results. And that's what you were referencing when you said, when you diet correctly. When you go into a fat loss phase, let's get into a deficit, let's effectively lose body fat, and let's get out. But a lot of people, they tiptoe back and forth. It's like they put one foot in and one foot out. They never get where they want to be from both a fat mass perspective, like a loss in body fat, and also from a lean mass perspective, because they're never all in on one goal. And so that's where I really feel there's a lot of benefit from being at or above maintenance in terms of improved biofeedback and improved adherence. And these all have downstream benefits and implications on your overall quality of life, and then also your ability to really get the progress out of the process. And so the other benefit that I don't want to forget is a lot of times women come to me and they have a poor relationship with food. And it's not that they have disordered eating or anything that's clinical. It's more so that they've always been in this mindset of restriction. And one of my favorite outcomes from getting a woman into a well-fueled state is when I transition them from a deficit phase to a building phase, I'm able to shift them from a mindset of restriction and subtraction to a mindset of abundance and addition. And I found that getting clients to eat more after years of underfueling helps, especially the women that I work with specifically, let go of that food fear, which improves their relationship with food. So these are all multifactorial benefits to being willing to sufficiently fuel yourself. If you have a goal, you should be willing to do what it takes to get there. And I find that the biggest impediment for many women is they want a better physique. They want to feel better. A lot of them actually have the goal of eating more. They just don't want to go through the process or embrace the discomfort. But I can't tell you how many times that I've transitioned a woman into more so out of a dieting phase and out of that cyclical dieting phase that they've been in, and that they've looked better, they felt better, they functioned better, they performed better. And then they've made comments to me about, I wish I'd done this earlier. And so all you have to do is be willing to try this out. And I guarantee if you do it with, whether it be through a coach like Ruby or myself, someone that can really guide you through the process, you'll see the benefits for yourself. And then you'll unlock another phase, another goal specific phase that you could turn to each and every year to get better and better.
So much in there. And I love it all so much because I also think many coaches are to blame for this because they chronically underfeed women because it is harder to work deeper in the trenches with women wanting to build a physique, with women doing the opposite of what social media has said, because you actually have to have the conversations, you have to challenge the thinking, you have to be willing to put something up against what they want to do and guide them through it, to explain it to them. Many trainers / coaches aren't willing to do that. They just want to get more and more numbers in the door and not have these conversations that challenge their mindset of chronically dieting, of 1,600 calories being maintenance. I'm sure you probably had many clients come to you from other coaches as well that have chronically underfed them, that have just put them straight into a deficit the second that they wanted to do a fat loss phase when they haven't actually built enough, which kind of feeds into the carb thing, where because it is harder mentally to sit at maintenance to fuel your body than it is to do a deficit. Deficits are so easy because it's so rewarding and you see the progress straight away. But the discomfort of realizing that you're not going to see progress for months and months and months and months and months when you're chasing a physique in the other direction. If you only use diet culture metrics, if you only use fat loss metrics, then you're going to be perpetually let down wanting to jump back into another deficit. But carbs are carbohydrates. You're going to feel bigger. You're going to feel like you're building muscle really fast. And even just training harder and what it helps you with in training is going to make you feel like I've built so much muscle already. You've only been doing this for like 4 months, 6 months. And we're not even like, you're not at your final form. But that's the thing. When you go through this process, if you don't understand the reality of progress, you're going to continually feel like I've built enough muscle, I'm getting fluffier. And you're not understanding that with that, there's the glycogen, there's the water, there's the hey, you're actually training the right way for once. And way too many times women feel like more training is the answer when they're plateaued or when they're not, quote unquote, seeing results. But you just alluded to the importance of recovery. There is no point trying to progress your physique if there's no recovery there. And doing more, it's kind of the same with what you said with the food. It's just going to tap into that recovery source. It's going to tap into your potential to actually build your physique. And then all of a sudden you're back to the start, kind of like that whole dieting thing. It works in both food and calories and in training. And if you're not focusing on let's set a runway for training and just focus there, the food will do its business. We don't want to focus on that. Just let that be the underlying factor for what that allows you to do. Whether it's in a fat loss phase, let's get in and out. And exactly what you said, I feel like people try to make sustainable choices. They want to make it sustainable. You don't want to make it sustainable when you're in a fat loss phase. And the fact that you're
fat loss is not a lifestyle, which is what many people don't get. This is a temporary phase to advance and enhance your physique. And really what a fat loss phase is it's a time to unveil the physique that you've earned through your building phase, because that foundation of muscle, that lean mass that gives you the, for women specifically, the strong, sculpted, toned physique that so many women desire, it's through the building phase. It isn't through the deficit. Now, the deficit is necessary to be able to reveal that. But here's the issue. Many women think that they have enough muscle when they really don't. They have never committed a period of time towards muscle growth. And a lot of times what ends up getting confused is that when you're leaner, you generally look actually more muscular. Ruby, you know that we've both been in stage shape. You look more muscular, even depleted down and like shredded than you would in an off season when you're a little bit fluffier, but you don't have the same amount of lean mass. We know that dieting, especially down to essential levels of body fat, there is an obligatory loss of lean mass. So even if that isn't muscle tissue, lean mass is a multifactorial component of tissue. So that can include muscle mass, that includes glycogen, that includes water, that includes electrolytes, that includes bone, that includes other tissues in there. What a lot of times is you're more of in a depleted state, but when you are in a well-fed state, you look fluffier or fuller, but a lot of times people will think that when they're in a dieted down state, they've always been lean. They're like, oh, I have a good amount of muscle. And they're, say like, in the mid, they're a tweener, meaning they're in between their fat loss phase. They're still lean, but they're not shredded. Then they get very lean and they realize, wow, I look like a scrawnier version of myself. I look smaller. I don't have the type of shape that I wanted. And then they're disappointed and they think that the solution is another fat loss phase. No, the solution is to refuel yourself, reverse the metabolic adaptations you've sustained from chronic dieting cycles, and then get yourself in the position where you can build some lean muscle tissue and really add some quality muscle mass to your frame so that the next time that you diet down and you do get lean and you do go all in on that goal, you're able to reveal a better physique than you had in the past. A lot of people with each subsequent dieting phase, they get essentially what ends up happening is they lose more lean mass during the process. And in the rebound from that, or in the post-diet phase, they gain more fat mass. So every single year, they're going through what I refer to as body decomposition rather than body recomposition. So every year, they have less lean mass and more fat mass because they're going through these chronic dieting cycles. They crash down. They realize, hey, I don't have the physique I want. They're really disappointed and discouraged. And then they overeat in the subsequent phase. They aren't taking a strategic approach to either. They're not taking a strategic approach to the way down, nor are they taking a strategic approach to the transition out of the diet, nor are they taking enough time committing themselves to actually building muscle.
That part. I was just laughing if you guys are watching the video thing, because I literally wrote down everything that Brandon just said. Fat loss, yes, okay, cool. The first time you do a fat loss phase, you're going to look like you built muscle and lost fat at the same time. because it's your first fat loss phase. Everything is like that when you do something for the first time, and then you're going to, this is where I got stuck, because I was like, oh my God, this is going to get me amazing results. And because I still had like that glycogen in my muscles, I was still looking really good. And then I'm like, okay, so this is the answer all the time. So I kept chasing it. And the more that I chased it, the worse that I looked. So then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to keep doing this now. Shit, I can't stick to my diet, so I'm going to have to prolong it. But I was thinking something the other day, which is what I wanted to say before I lead into the next one. I was thinking something the other day. I opened the fridge because I'm like, I feel like more bread. Even though I've like already eaten my meal, I'm like, I feel like another bit of bread. So I opened the fridge, had the bit of bread, and I'm like, this is what people do when they're dieting. Like, because they've been trying to restrict things for so long, they lose that willpower / discipline / the ability to say no to eating something that goes over the calories. It's so hard for you to just be strict and be okay with hunger, to be okay with eating less, because fat loss is freaking difficult when you do it right. It's just that you have never done it right. It just feels difficult because you're always in and out. But the fact that I can allow myself to have extras here and there without giving a shit because I'm not in a fat loss phase, if that was what I was doing and I was in a fat loss phase, well, I would never get results because I could never say no to something because I'm so mentally depleted from enforcing this willpower muscle that is never going to come back to me until I spend a long period of time away from needing to use it. And that is where a lot of people get stuck. And then you mentioned if you're exhausting yourself with training, if you're exhausting yourself with your dieting, that is amplified. Everything that Brandon said, because your mindset is so just fatigued from having to think about every single minute choice you have to make. But then back to what you were saying, fat loss makes you look like you built muscle and got leaner at first, but you can't keep doing that because then you'll just keep going in reverse. And there's a lot of women that do say, well, I want to tone and shape up my legs. I want to tone and shape up my delts, but I don't want to get bulky. I don't want to build them too much. And straight away, you know this with legs all the time. Legs are the first things that women like freak out about. And if you guys listening to this saw my reel on this, muscle as a cell weighs more than fat. Because if you're thinking of muscle tissues, as in 1 kilo of lean muscle tissue fibers and 1 kilo of fat, the lean muscle tissue fibers weigh less and are smaller than the fat. But when you actually look at that muscle in the body, it weighs more and it's bigger in a sense, because now you're adding in glycogen, now you're adding in water. And all of a sudden, those muscle fibers that weighed the same, I was meant to say the muscle fibers weigh the same as the fat cell. Once you add in all that other stuff, it's going to look bigger. It's going to look fluffier because carbohydrates add volume. And it is the bit that there's 4 quads. There's like 4 heads of the quad. That's why it's a quad. And then you're adding in the hamstrings. Like, they are the biggest muscle tissues. Imagine how much water and glycogen they're holding. So of course they're going to expand. As soon as you bump up your food, you're finally hydrated. As soon as you're well fueled, you're finally nourished. What do you expect that to happen? Like, do you still want to fit into your size 0 jeans? It's not going to happen. But this then leads into the conversation, which I wanted to go into, bringing carbs into this. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, you feel fine training this way, recovering this way. Let's use training for what it's actually used for. And that's to build muscle, to build a physique, to get strong as fuck, and to progress in that direction with weights. It's not to get leaner. It's not to burn fat. It's to build muscle. It's to get strong, do all these amazing things. Once you do that, that's the physique stuff. The diet supports that. And then when you put yourself into a deficit, like Brandon said, it's not about let's just shove you onto the lowest calories possible. We want to still support that performance because we want to keep that muscle there. And this is where carbs come in. I don't know if you're on the same wavelength with me here. I try to keep carbs as high as possible. I'm someone who actually is a huge advocate of pushing protein high when building and when in a fat loss phase as well. But the only reason that I would bring protein down closer to the minimum, because I'm usually at maximum or above of the range, because I've only seen positive body composition results with more protein, and also the ability to stick to a diet because it's more satiating. But I would only bring that down if it meant that I could keep the carbs higher to fuel that performance, to fuel the recovery, but the protein isn't low. It's just in the minimum range. So I'm going to let you take that away and why carbs are so important here, especially if you're over the age of 40, because once peri-menopause hits and recovery is impacted even more because of all the fluctuations and sleep being disturbed, how that all ties together in physique development.
Absolutely. I think that carbs are one of the most overrated or underrated rather components of nutritional program design, especially when it comes to women. I think that a lot of women have a fear of carbs, unjustly so. Like we'll go through some of the mechanisms and things, but I think that they've just been kind of sold like these narratives or these myths from diet culture, and they believe that because ketogenic diets or carnivore diets or whatever it may be, these low carbohydrate models are popular in our pop culture today, that's what they should be doing if their goal is to optimize body composition. And that's just not the case. If your goal is to build muscle, improve your body composition, and feel better in the gym, carbs are your friend. They're not an enemy. And so when I look at, like, Ruby, you were referencing how you look at program design from a nutrition perspective. And yes, I do prioritize protein first. I am a big higher protein advocate for its effects on energy expenditure, muscle mass accretion, muscle maintenance, for its appetite regulating effects. That's always going to be my priority. But when it comes down to the energy or the fuel substrates, which are carbohydrates and fats, I'm looking at both a person's preferences and goals, but my objective with them is to be metabolically flexible. I don't demonize either macronutrient. I want their body to be able to efficiently use both carbs and fats for energy, depending on what they're doing. And so during higher intensity training, your body needs glucose. So you're going to need carbohydrates as fuel. But at rest or during lower intensity activities like cardio, you should be able to tap into fat sources. The problem is that so many women come to me after years of under eating carbs that they think that that's the only way to get or stay lean and to actually build a physique. And the reality is, cutting carbs for too long can actually hold you back from looking and feeling your best. So there's so many benefits of actually including a sufficient amount of carbohydrates in your diet, and many of them are overlooked. A lot of people just look at it from a scale weight perspective, and you overlook the many multifactorial benefits that carbohydrates can provide you with. So when it comes to building muscle, carbs are huge. If we look at it from a hormone perspective, carbs trigger the release of key anabolic hormones like insulin, mTOR, and IGF-1. And when you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, when you actually look at people that train on low muscle glycogen stores, and you look at studies that look at this, it ramps up AMPK, which is a cellular signal that competes with mTOR and can actually interfere with the muscle protein synthesis process. So you're inhibiting or you're hindering your ability to gain muscle. But by keeping carbs in your diet, especially around training, you keep your glycogen stores higher, you reduce that AMPK signal, and you let mTOR do its job, which is to build muscle. So this means that if you're including a sufficient amount of carbohydrates in your diet, you're going to grow more, you're going to recover better, and you're going to see more changes in your physique. The next role that carbs play is actually in muscle retention. So this is where we're going to go through both sides of the spectrum. I just spoke about muscle growth, but if you are someone in a fat loss phase, carbs are vital in terms of the muscle retention process, because especially when you consume carbs around training, it raises insulin, which is an anti-catabolic hormone, meaning that it helps to stop muscle protein breakdown. Insulin not only helps lower cortisol as well, which is your body's main stress hormone, but we have to consider the fact that when you have high, like runaway cortisol levels, that's going to break down muscle tissue. Now, if we look at the other mechanisms within that, cortisol also interferes with thyroid production. So when you have carbs, you're able to blunt the effects of cortisol, and you have less muscle protein breakdown and less interference with thyroid production and conversion. So carbs aren't just fuel, they're protection for your muscle and also a buffer against stress. Then when we look at training performance, which is really going to be the key driver over the long term of the physique that you want to get, carbs are vital for performance. And they're especially for women who want to maximize their training. And that's really because carbs are your body's main and preferred energy source for high intensity exercise. So this is really going to be specific towards things like hypertrophy training. But I have a lot of women that come to me and they like CrossFit, they like HIIT classes, they like boot camps. These are all things that have an anaerobic or high intensity aspect to them. And a lot of women are not getting the benefits out of that because they're not actually sufficiently fueling themselves with carbs. Then when we also look at the research specifically on pre-workout carbohydrates, we see that it helps with increasing energy levels, strength, and how hard you can push, as well as your total volume performance, meaning the amount of reps and load that you can handle across the subsequent sets that you have in your workout. And what we see from the resistance training literature, and specifically the hypertrophy training literature, is the more volume you can handle over time, the more muscle you can build. So these are direct performance. If you actually look at the carbohydrate literature, they're termed an ergogenic aid, meaning they're a performance aiding. Other things that I find that women aren't aware of, but when I speak to them about these things, it kind of brings them into a headspace where they're like, all right, you know what? I do need to have more carbohydrates in my diet. Number one thing I see with women in terms of a hormone perspective are things like hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's. What you have to realize is carbs play a critical role in thyroid health. So carbs and insulin actually increase T3, which is our metabolically active thyroid hormone. Carbs also help through the mechanism of increasing insulin, they help to buffer cortisol. And when you have lower cortisol levels, say you had chronically high cortisol levels, not only does that impair thyroid production, but it also impairs your conversion of T4 to metabolically active T3. But when we look at studies where either people are on low carbohydrate diets or they're on sufficient carbohydrate diets, which are usually mixed diets, like moderate protein, moderate carbohydrates, moderate fat, we see better thyroid outcomes. And then another thing you were alluding to was the fact that you were talking about muscle glycogen stores, and the fact that for every gram of carbohydrate stored as glycogen, it brings 3 to 4 grams of water. Now, some people will look at that from a scale perspective as that's a negative. But actually, if you look at it from a physique perspective, I was a physique competitor, you were a physique competitor, Ruby. I have prepped a lot of people, and they look better when they get out of that depleted state, because when you have both glycogen, like full glycogen stores, and the water that comes with that, you look fuller, rounder, and you get better pumps in the gym, which is really why we see that bodybuilders do a carb load before the show. So a lot of times I find that women want like a fuller, rounder look in their glutes and their shoulders and their arms. And if you want those type of like curves and that sculpted physique, carb is going to help that, because by topping off your muscle glycogen, you're going to allow your muscles to pop, and it's going to help you achieve that athletic tone look that so many are after. And so this is something that many women don't have that look, and they wonder why. It's not only because they haven't built enough muscle, but even when they do build enough muscle, if they are still undercarbing themselves, they don't have that actual aesthetic look that they're looking for, because they're in a glycogen depleted state. And the last thing that I really think is vital to understand about carbohydrates is their impacts on dietary adherence and satiety. Carbohydrates, when we look at it in comparison, like we were look at a gram of carbohydrates to a gram of fat, they're far more satiating per calorie than fats. And these, carbohydrates are also very micronutrient dense foods. So we're looking at fruits, vegetables, tubers, starches, things like that. So you're going to be able to include potatoes, fruit, veggies into your diet. And these are all not only micronutrient dense foods, but they're also high volume, low calorie, and they're very satiating. And so there's so many multifactorial benefits of including carbohydrates in your diet that many people overlook, not only from a training performance perspective, but from a recovery perspective, a muscle growth perspective, a muscle retention perspective when it comes to fat loss, but also from the fact that it's going to enhance the look of your physique, but also enhance your dietary adherence and your ability to actually comply to your diet, where you're going to be able to actually manage your appetite. And that's something that many people are struggling with when they're on these very low carbohydrate diets, and they have very low food volume.
That this is the thing, like if your approach worked, then why are you still struggling to see the results that you want? And most of the time, those approaches that you tried that you worked before, not worked before, but anything works until it doesn't work, because anything works at first, and then you get caught up in that, like, especially when you have a lot of weight to lose, everything is going to work, and then you're going to get bottlenecked, and then you realize that you've never really changed ever since that first phase. So then you keep trying the same thing over and over again. It's like, what got you from A to B isn't going to get you from B to C. And you said so much, so I'm going to try to compact it, because I want you to like cover it as much as you can in the last 20 to 30 minutes. You said something I always say, everyone speaks about this to balance your hormones, or this for hormone health. Yeah, okay, getting healthy fats over saturated fats is key for hormone health in the fat perspective, but there is nothing more hormone friendly than eating enough carbs. There is nothing more hormone destroying than being undercovered, being undercarbed when you're trying to build performance, because that's when cortisol gets dysregulated. That's when your hormones get dysregulated, because you're underfueling this pursuit of muscle growth. And then that there was the part where you said carbs help you train hard, etc. It's like, well, you can feel like you're training hard, but is it progressive? Is it doing anything? Is it building anything? And then there's this, you've realized this, I know you have, I don't have to ask. So because everyone has been pushing, let's train heavy, let's push yourself in the gym, all these researchers have come on the other side of it saying you don't need to train heavy, you just need to train to fatigue. There is a difference between training to get tired and training to be effective. And you can feel fatigued on low carbs, on low calories, but your training's not doing anything, because you're coming out with a smaller store. It's like, let's give the car like a little bit of petrol, and then let's just go as fast as we can and just get somewhere. You would have got a lot further if you had a lot more fuel in the tank to start with. So either way, you're maxing out its capacity, but one got a lot further than the other. And then insulin resistance. Well, what is the worst thing for insulin resistance? Not moving enough, not having muscle. What do carbs help you do? They help you train hard to build muscle, and they help you recover, meaning you're going to have a lot more energy after, to be a lot more active. And I know I wanted to bring energy flux into this, and I think this is how it all ties in. That's what carbs help you do. That's what recovering well helps you do. That's what training smart and effective versus just training more and adding more allows you to do. And I always have the same conversation with ladies with PCOS. I've been told I can't eat carbs. No, it's just that the way that you're structuring your whole day with movement, with muscle, with the carbs that you do choose aren't effective for what you want physique wise, because carbs are just as beneficial for you. It's just that you guys also need strategy. And this, you just reminded me of something I wanted to bring up before. You said eating more intentionally, and that's like dieting intentionally. Yeah, but most people just eat more. Eating more doesn't build muscle. Eating a shit ton of protein doesn't build muscle. Training builds muscle. And if you just eat more, but you haven't addressed your training because you're so focused on diet metrics and, my God, I ate more, the number on the scale is trigger back. Well, you're stuck because you're focusing on fat loss metrics. They are not the same. But this is where coaches and programs and all that have got people tired, because no one's been taught how to focus on anything else. And no one wants to teach that, because they just want to put up these before and afters because they're flashy. But the real process of change is so much slower when you're building muscle. And this is now time back to you. So I don't know how to explain it in simple terms. So the PDH, what happens when you go from like low carb, sporadic carbs actually fueling enough, and then people feeling like they're intolerant to carbs. So how PDH, which is an enzyme, plays a role in that. And then why do you think, especially because coaches usually shove women on low calories, why do you think women underestimate how much food they actually need, and that difference between eating more / overeating / actually fueling more?
All right, so I'm going to take the PDH enzyme question, and then you keep peppering the rest so that I remember, Ruby. So first and foremost, what a lot of people don't realize is that we have research that looks at just 3 to 5 days of low carbohydrate dieting and its effects on actual muscle glycogen usage. So what that research, there's a great researcher named Trent Stellingworth and also Louise Burke, which is from your side of the world, actually. She's an immensely well-published researcher. What they found was essentially at 5 days of low carbohydrate dieting, even if you try to restore glycogen in terms of refeeding, in terms of high carb feeding, you're not able to actually tap into that actual glycogen to use it as fuel. So they've done this in endurance training athletes, they've done this in other anaerobic activities, and they see time and time again that when you go into a low carbohydrate diet, even if it's short term, or you go into a ketogenic, which would be a high fat, low carbohydrate diet, what ends up happening is you downregulate PDH, which is an enzyme. It's pyruvate dehydrogenase, which is the gatekeeper for glycolysis. So what ends up happening from there is that when you have a downregulation, and it's substantial, you'll see in the charts that it like really just goes down like very precipitously, very quickly. When you have an inhibition of PDH enzyme, you can't actually tap into the actual glycogen that you have. So even if you were to restore glycogen storage by increasing carbohydrates, so say you were doing a cyclical diet, meaning you were doing low carbohydrates Monday through Friday, and then you were refeeding on weekends, you would not be able to utilize all of that muscle or that actual glycogen for fueling actual performance. And we see a decrement in performance, especially at top ends. So this would be power, speed, or even strength work. So that's the first thing with PDH enzyme. I think the next question was, or you wanted me to speak on why people overestimate or underestimate their intake?
Underestimate how much food they actually need, because there's this whole like, let's eat around 1600 calories, that sort of thing. But bring into that the high energy flux and how carbs help with that, and fueling helps with that, because it's not just about the calories you eat.
Absolutely. All right. So first and foremost, I think a lot of people underestimate, and I'm not going to throw out an arbitrary number. And the reason for that is I work with women anywhere from, I have a woman that's 90 pounds on my roster to women that are over 250 pounds. So I see a very wide demographic of who I'm working with. So their needs from an energetic or a calorie perspective, vastly vary. But even if we look in the literature, there's a great study by Herman Poncer in 2021 that was, it's something to the effect of total daily energy expenditure across a life course. And they even find that for women that are 50 kilograms, which is about 110 pounds in US, metrics, there are women that are under 1,000 calories per day in terms of their RMR or their total daily energy expenditure. So there are women that are just outliers, but at the same time, the average woman, at least in my experience, is around 1,600 calories that they can eat. And now, mind you, I'm working with a population that a lot of these women are smaller. However, I don't believe in throwing out arbitrary calorie metrics, because you are a unique individual. Your physiology, your preferences, your lifestyle, your dieting history, that is something that no calorie calculator can spit out a number and actually incorporate or factor into consideration. That's why in my own coaching efforts and in my own coaching program, I don't use any Mifflin St. Jean or any of these calorie calculators. I do a very extensive intake with each and every person. I do a needs analysis. I spot the bottlenecks both in their programming, their approach, their lifestyle, and their physiology. And then I work on those things. And really, it's mostly through food logging that I'm able to see what is their actual activity levels through step count tracking and training tracking. And then also through their dietary intake logs that I do in a very comprehensive manner, what is their actual maintenance calorie intake? Now, what I often find is that many women have been sold this idea that it's only about eating less. And so often they don't even believe how much they can actually eat. So I'm going to give you a perfect example. You know, one of my clients, her name's Patty Pereira, correct? Patty P. Yeah, she's awesome. So Patty came to me and she was 170 pounds initially, and she was eating about 150 to 170 grams of carbohydrates. So she was what I would consider low carb for that body weight. Her calories were low. She was actually suffering from insulin resistance. And I'm super close to Patty, so she's cool with me talking about this. But I took her through a primer phase, which is actually the first episode you and I ever did together. So if anyone wants to go back and listen to that, you actually release that twice. So I would highly encourage to go back and listen to the primer phase. But really what I try to do during a primer phase is to optimize someone's physiology. There is some body recomposition in there, but I'm really trying to fuel women properly, switch them into a hypertrophy training program, match their training to their nutrition, and really build a better foundation from which we can build or we can cut from later on. So it really is to prime their physiology as well as their habits and behaviors. So we went through that phase. We went through a fat loss phase. I actually got her in photo shoot condition. Patty lost 40 pounds in that photo shoot prep. Well, throughout the last 8 months, we've been in a building phase, which we just ended last week. So she went over 8 months in a building phase, not once going back into a deficit. We built her food up to over 400 grams of carbs per day and around 3,000 calories per day. Now, this is a woman that came to me at 1,700 calories, and she was maintaining at 170 pounds. At the height of her building phase, she was 155 pounds, eating 3,000 calories and 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. And she expressed to me many times over that A, she couldn't believe it, and B, she had a lot of hesitation. So the biggest concern for Patty every time.
How much did she gain in the building phase? Because I think a lot of people, they never reach this phase because they're so tied to the scale number. Therefore, they never built their calories up high enough because of that. But also mention the high flux model because she lives a high flux lifestyle.
Absolutely. So Patty has probably gained over 8 months around 12 pounds. So about 1.5 pounds per month. So it wasn't like a precipitous gain by any means. She still stayed lean, but she's put on a ton of tissue. Now, keep in mind that now at her body composition metrics, she is not only lighter and leaner, but also has far more muscle mass. And really what it took was pairing both her higher energy diet, a higher carbohydrate and higher calorie diet with a specialization cycle, which we really focused on bringing up her glutes and delts. And so that was, I paired, it wasn't just about one or the other. It wasn't about force feeding muscle growth, nor was it just about training yourself into the ground without sufficiently fueling yourself. Every subsequent adjustment that I made to training and nutrition, they were done matched and paired to one another to make sure that we were still going in the same direction. Now, Patty also is a woman that I've used the high energy flux model with, and I'll explain that for your audience in a little bit more detail. I have conceptualized something called the high energy flux model. And this is something I've been using with women for years. And really the reason for that is because most of the women I work with come to me with the same big picture goals. They want a lean, muscular, athletic looking body, and they want to look good, but they also want to feel energized and not depleted so that they actually feel well in the process. And what the biggest issue is that a lot of them want to be able to make physique progress without having to starve themselves as they've done in the past. Now, what you have to realize is that being able to eat more and make physique progress is possible, but only if you combine two key factors. You need to build more muscle and you need to move more throughout the day. And this is where the high energy flux model comes in. So the easiest way that I can describe this high energy flux model is that when I take someone through this approach, I work on getting them to eat more and move more. And by intelligently pairing their nutrition to their training, their cardio, and their activity levels, I'm able to improve their physique and their metabolism. So when I have a conversation with a client, I'm like, listen, I think that this, now, mind you, not every person that I work with is on a high energy flux lifestyle. However, when I am thinking that this person is a proper candidate for it, I try to express to them that I want them to think about their body essentially like a metabolic machine. The more you move and the harder you train, the more fuel you can handle without storing it as body fat. So often what I'll try to do with clients, especially the women that I work with, and especially those with a long history of low calorie dieting, is I try to shift them away from that eat less, subtract more model and into a high energy flux model where we focus on more movement, both in and out of the gym, better training performance. So I want them to stop focusing on body weight and I want them to start focusing on training performance. And then with that, I couple more food so I can fuel that muscle growth, that recovery, and their lifestyle overall. And this leads to a better metabolism and a more responsive body, which ultimately results in these ladies looking better, feeling better, functioning better, and performing better. So really, if I was to encompass like one of my main goals in this high energy flux model, is I always want to get my clients eating the most amount of food possible while maintaining or improving their physique. And with the high energy flux approach, I'm not just using the typical eat less method of improving body composition. That's the tool that most people use. They think that the only way that they can improve a client's body composition is to have them eat less. And they're only using the fat loss mindset and the fat loss model, where I'm working on pairing the nutrition plan to the training plan to make sure that I can get a client's body to handle more food and to actually use it well. So I'm checking metrics like blood glucose. I'm doing blood work every 12 to 16 weeks. I'm looking at insulin sensitivity metrics such as fasting insulin, A1C, home IR. I'm making sure that if I'm increasing carbohydrates, that their body's actually able to utilize it. And I find that this is really helpful for women, especially those who have spent years of chronic dieting and under eating, because they are essentially coming to me in the state of metabolic adaptation and also metabolic downregulation. However, with this high energy flux, as I increase food, I get more micronutrients in the system, I get more carbohydrates. I'm able to rectify a lot of the hormonal issues that they've had from underfueling themselves, whether that be hormones like sex hormone downregulation or hypothalamic amenorrhea. As I'm able to get more fuel and better energy availability into the system, I'm able to reverse a lot of those adaptations. Now, the one thing I try to get across to people is that this high energy flux model is a lifestyle approach. It's not a protocol. Most of the protocols that many coaches use in this industry are way too restrictive to sustain long-term. And often what that results in is their clients lose a little bit of fat, but they can't maintain it because the methods they use to get them there, like low calorie dieting or very low carbohydrate diets or excessive exercise plans, can't be sustained by the vast majority of people out there. Whereas with this high energy flux, it's a part of your lifestyle. It's a sustainable lifestyle where we focus on daily movement, on progressive strength training and fueling your body. And with that, it allows for you to eat more food, to feel more energized, and to be more consistent because you're not in this chronic state of restriction. So you're shifting from a mindset of scarcity and restriction to a mindset of abundance and performance. And when you're eating more and moving more, you have better performance in training, you have more energy in your workouts, you have higher volume tolerance, and you have the ability to push harder over time. Now, with that, consider the fact that I'm not just pushing resistance training. A lot of times I'm using movement throughout the day. I'm using movement snacks, or I'm using post-meal walks to help with blood glucose regulation. I'm also keeping cardio in. So they had better aerobic fitness, which is not only good for their heart, but it means that they can recover faster between sets. They can handle higher amounts of training, and they generally feel better both in and out of the gym. And with that movement factor, they're able to get better recovery because when you move your muscles, not only do you have better increases in GLUT4 translocation that helps with insulin sensitivity, but it also increases blood flow and nutrient delivery, which helps to decrease things like DOMS or muscle soreness. And so time and time again, when I transition a woman, especially women, because and I say this, I use this with men as well, but I do want to get across the fact that I have a lot of women that come to me that they've just been living in a mindset of restriction and in this kind of like this model or this approach where it's always about eating less, and they've never given themselves a chance to actually fuel themselves properly and feel better. So when I transition women from that type of model, I say, listen, I have hundreds of case studies where I've taken women in a very similar position as you into a place where you're moving more and eating more, and it's worked out really well from a body composition, a biofeedback perspective, and a performance perspective. Do you want to give this a try? When I'm able to get them bought in and walk them through the process, I notice that their hunger is better managed. They have better mood. They have better daily energy levels. Their cravings and their food focus go down, and adherence gets way easier because they're no longer white knuckling their way through a low calorie diet. And with that, we get better progress over time. It's something that's more sustainable. It's something that's more enjoyable. And they're getting downstream implications and benefits from a metabolism perspective, a performance perspective, a muscle growth perspective, a hormone perspective. And these are things that cannot be discounted when someone has yet to experience those things.
Yeah. And the worst thing for your hormones, the worst thing for your body composition, the worst thing for anything is to be either underfueled or under-recovered. And I think that's the state that a lot of women are finding themselves in. Even if you have a lot of fat to lose, even if you're overweight, you're still underfueled, because when you do overeat, it's so sporadic, it's not planned, and it's not on the foods that actually fuel a healthy body, a healthy metabolism, healthy hormone profile. And this is the very part that I mentioned about twice now, and that's that coaches aren't willing to help you through this process when they are all about, let's just get the motor numbers in, let's get you on a training app, let's get you doing this, doing that, because this is an intensive process that requires you to do harder things. And you don't just start new habits, new ways of living your lifestyle overnight, in 1 week, in 1 month, in a 12-week coach's minimum. Like, this shit takes time. And factoring in these little movement snacks, factoring in what's realistic for your lifestyle, which is not a lot of things to start with, but over time it builds in. And this is when you start to live with more calories, more food, looking better than ever, training harder than ever. And it is very hard for you to even think that you love training hard, training heavy, going to the gym, because I sure as hell started to resent it when I stayed stuck on 160 carbs, 1,600 calories. But once I started eating 2,200, 300 grams of carbs, more carbs. It's like training hits you different, life hits you different. You're going to want to move more, but you can't get to that place of thriving in this high energy flux model if you don't actually do the process before the diet to allow the diet to be effective, to realize that just because you have fat to lose doesn't mean that fat loss is your answer right now, because obviously, it hasn't worked yet. We need to take a whole step back and let your body and mindset breathe, exhale, so that you can actually go all in when there's a fat loss phase there, because you need to be meticulous. You need to have the systems in place for you to then just apply a calorie deficit to, so that it's easier, because fat loss is hard. So I guess to sum up this podcast, the best thing that we can do is leave you with two amazing takeaways. What is one takeaway that you want them to walk away with in terms of allowing themselves to feel more, to move away from the chronic dieting mentality when they think that this physique is on the other side of another diet? And then if they just do another building phase and then diet for summer, it will be the answer, which we know it's not when they've lived like that their whole lives. And then the second thing is, what do you wish more women knew about carbs, metabolism, and muscle?
Yeah, so first, understand where you're coming from. I've had these conversations time and time again. For anyone out there, any of you ladies out there, if you're nervous about eating more, remember, think about food as fuel. It's going to allow you to get to where you want to be, just like you would with your car. A lot of times people treat their material items actually better than their own body. And that's something that I really try to focus on. The best investment you can make into your physique and your long-term health is to build muscle. And this is one way to be able to expedite that progress. So I want you to think about, if your goal is to change the shape of your body, not to just lose weight or get skinnier or get smaller, you have to give yourself permission to get out of a deficit and actually fuel your goals. And then when it comes to carbohydrates, I just want to get across the fact that if your goal is to maximize your performance, your recovery, your muscle growth, and even fat loss, because it does play a role in fat loss, carbs need to be in your diet. And it's not that you have to eat an overabundance of them. You don't have to be like Patty, that I have around 400 grams of carbohydrates. That has been done through a year and a half of coaching and very strategic and intentional adjustments, engaging her biofeedback, her blood work, her responses, her preferences, all these things. But really what I'm trying to get across is that you don't have to eat a ton of them, but don't be scared of them. I don't think that this fatalistic food fear is doing anyone a service, both from a physical perspective, but also from a mental perspective. I think the real power comes from learning how to use carbs and calories strategically to fuel your training, support your recovery, and make your nutrition both enjoyable and sustainable. So really, when it comes down to it, let's drop the fear around carbs and really look at them as your ally, not your enemy.
Yeah, exactly. Because once you, like Brandon said, but I know I said it too, when you experience what life can feel like on the other side, what training can feel like on the other side, you would not want to go back, and you wouldn't even want to go back. And I feel like, just as a caveat, because I feel like this can be a fear as you listen to this podcast, it can be like, oh my goodness, I'm losing control. I'm losing strict control of this. As soon as I start allowing myself to eat more, I'm not going to be able to reduce my food, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, this is what you want. This is what you've been asking for your whole life. This does not mean losing control. You need to be okay with the messy middle. Many times, trust that on the other side, things will be better, because sometimes things are a little shaky to start with because you're leaning into something new, and that is okay. Fearing that shaky middle and thinking that things are just going to blow up in your face is stopping you from taking the one step that can make things better, because clearly things aren't working right now. And if they aren't working right now, when you're stressed TF out, how are you going to push harder to actually lose the fat you want to lose, to actually build the body you want to lose, instead of releasing the pressure valve and allowing the system to actually work? But yeah, I loved everything there. I hope you guys gained a lot from this. I'm going to put the past episodes we did down below. I'm going to put everything else from Brandon down below. His Instagram is Brandon.cruz. That will be down below as well with an underscore. And is there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Absolutely, guys. If you need anything from me, feel free to, like Ruby alluded to, you guys can find me on Instagram at BrandonCruz_. You can also email me, which is the best place to find me, which is at bcruzfitness@gmail.com. I have a weekly podcast that goes out. It's called the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. I'd love for you guys to join. But Ruby, thank you so much for having me on. I can't believe it's already been 7. We've been doing this for years, but it's always a pleasure linking up with you and being able to spread good information and a positive message.
Definitely. And you guys would definitely want to listen to the past episodes, because we go just as in depth as this and also touch on the human element. If you love this podcast, please give me another 5-star rating. I'm almost at 100. And I love you all. I appreciate you all. And thank you for listening through to the end. And you'll hear me on the next podcast.